Hey everybody, it's Allie Edwards, and welcome back to my table. This week I have been sharing projects using our love story play kit. Super fun, lots of little jumping off points here. One of the projects, or one of the things that I wanted to do as I was looking at the different pieces in the kit and being prompted for stories from my own life, I was looking at the part 1 and part 2 card, and I was thinking, okay, what is a story that I could tell using part 1 and part 2? And one of the most significant part 1, part 2 / books, chapters of my life were my first marriage and then my second marriage. And so I decided that I would do a project that honored both of them. Chris, my first husband, he and I still have a very nice relationship, and I feel very, very thankful for that. And I like the opportunity to document a little bit about that. Before I dive into that, I wanted to just share, I got out one of my old scrapbooks, and I thought this might be interesting to just take a look at here. This is a scrapbook that I worked on many years ago when I was doing a lot of 12 by 12 projects too. So these are older ones back when I was married. And I looked through here just to kind of look at some of the images in the pictures that were on some of the different layouts here. Let's see if I can get it all the way in there. And it was just fun to take a little look back. I know that in the past there have been people who have asked questions about ex-spouses or things in their scrapbooks. And my perspective on it has always been that it is a part of my story, right? It's just a part of my story. And I think, in my own situation, there was an amicable ending. And I think that probably helps me as I think back on this, and, with a softer heart than maybe I would have in another, if it would have been different. But all I can talk about is what I know to be true. And so it was really fun to look back on here and look at some of the memories from this particular point and time in my life with our friends and where we lived and what our cars looked like and the college we dated in college. And then some of the early things with the kids too, and our wedding picture. That was one I considered adding that. One of those, but what I ended up doing was a picture of us when we graduated, but I could have taken one of these too. Sometimes what I do with these is I'll just use my phone and I'll take a picture and then I can print it out in order to use the picture. So fun. It was such a fun, it was fun, and it ended in a semi-sad way, and then the next chapter has been full of adventures. So I like the idea of just doing a little bit of honoring that. One of the things that I have loved about memory keeping and about doing it over such a long period of time now, more than 20 years, is that we as people evolve, right? We evolve, in the way that we look at particular stories in our life can change. It can ebb and flow. We can feel different about different stories from the past with perspective, right? With the passage of time, those kinds of things. So obviously this is not necessarily a page that everyone would do, because or a story that everyone would tell, because everybody's going to have different parts to their own story. But you might have your own part 1 and part 2 in some piece of how love has showed up in your own life. Maybe it's with a spouse, maybe it's with a parent, maybe it's with a child, maybe it's a love story with yourself, right? Like your childhood self and your today self. That would be something that you could do that would be similar if you like the look of this. I went ahead and grabbed some pattern papers from my stash. These are either from past story kits or scrapbook kits. I think this one is from the Grow scrapbook kit. And then I'm going to pair that with a Vellum. This was from one of the Stories by the Month kits, I think last year. It's just one that I really like, so this will be a good jumping off point. In my scrapbook itself, I'll just use the backside for something else and add something on there. But I think what I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to keep this pretty simple and pretty straightforward. And it might be kind of considering coming at it from the lens of gratitude, right? Kind of loving kindness or loving gratitude. That's my initial thought here. And I think what I'm going to do is probably use some sticker paper and type up my journaling. You can, if you have the digital version of this, you can absolutely add your story right on here before you print it out. You could do that. You can also run these through your printer. I might do that. Let me see what I come up with. But I'd like to type up my thoughts there. And then I think I'm going to round the corners of the outsides of each of these so that it looks like it's a little grouping. And then the last thing that I might do is just do a little bit of stitching right down the middle on my sewing machine. But overall, it's going to be pretty simple. I'm going to punch holes in there to be able to add them into my album. And let's see how this one evolves in the process of putting it together. All right, diving into the process of this one. First of all, I want to say I've got a pretty severe cold right now, so forgive me if my voice sounds a little funny. What I ended up doing here was I decided to just use the digital version and add my journaling directly onto there. There are different ways that you can add text onto a journal card. You could use sticker paper and align it based on, measure the bottom part, figure out what the size is of the space available to you and do it that way. You can also print directly onto a journal card by measuring that space and setting it up on a 3x4 background. Or you can use the digital version like I did here and add my text on top and then print it out. I printed it on photo paper because that's often what I like to use even when I'm printing out journaling. I'm also taking the journaling card and my photo and I'm taping them back to back, and then I'm going to do a little temporary adhesive on there. But before I do that, I'm going to use my corner rounder to round the outsides of the corner. I like how that makes it feel like its own little item, right? Its own little own a little island therein and into itself, right? An island unto itself. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to temporarily adhere these onto the background papers before I run it through my sewing machine and do kind of a zigzaggy style of stitch in a pink thread, which you're going to see in just a minute. I did get a new sewing machine this year, and so I'm playing around with it and kind of learning more about it. It's another brother. I had a brother before, but this one has a lot more already established stitches that you can use, and so I'm playing around with learning a little bit more about that. But that's what that looks like once I ran it through the sewing machine. And originally, this is the space where I thought I was going to stop my project. So you could absolutely get to this part and go, that's good enough for me. I love it. You've got part 1, part 2, you've got words, you've got photos, you've got a nice background. Excellent place to end if that is what feels right to you. As I was playing around though, I was like, what would it be to add something else on there? What else could I add on there that would be functional, that would still relate to the story I was telling? And I decided to play around with the idea of creating a vellum flip up. And I was thinking about big numbers. I was thinking about big numbers that I have in my stash. And I was thinking about how, this has a part 1 and a part 2, and what could I use to kind of re-emphasize the part 1 and the part 2 of it. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking a sheet of vellum. I'm going to cut this vellum to, I believe, 4.5. I'm going to go 4.5 by 6. The 1/2 inch is going to give me space to fold over a little bit of the top, which then I can tuck underneath the photo and the journaling there. Now, if I would have planned this out a little bit more in advance, I may have waited to stitch. I might have set this vellum flip up in advance, but because I've already stitched it down there, I need to do one other thing in order to enable this to be able to slip down underneath, and you're going to see me do that in a minute. Right now, I'm just kind of measuring out where the 4x6 is. I end up figuring out that it's significantly easier to just grab a 4x6 card and use that as a template for folding over, and that's what I end up doing here. But what I'm going to do in order to allow this to slip underneath my photo and journaling with that stitching there is I need to just cut out a little square essentially, or a little portion in the middle of my fold over. That way it can go around the stitching portion. And so I'm just going to trim. It doesn't really matter how big it is. It just needs to be big enough to go around the stitching. I don't know, that's probably maybe another 1/2 inch there, right there. And then I'm using a bone folder to push it down just to have a nice even line there. And then I'm going to use my scissors to trim right across the top. Now that gives me 2 flaps that can fit underneath my photo and my journaling to create a flip up. I really like how this turned out. This is totally something that I could use in other projects. I felt like the adhesive that was underneath there is going to work fine, and I'll add a little bit more adhesive as well. I also did round the corners of the vellum. I know I did the bottom on this one already, but I believe I'm going to lift up the top a little bit and do that there at some point here. And I think that I probably, yeah, here I go. That's what I thought. I'm going to round that so it has that nice flush corner with the corner of the journaling and photo that I already have there. Sometimes talking and saying all this stuff a million times just makes me laugh because it doesn't feels like it doesn't make any sense in my head. Or maybe it's just the cold medicine. All right, so what I did next was I went into my December daily box of numbers. I have some specific ones that I have used for December daily in the past, looking for a 1 and a 2. What out of the numbers that I have from the last few years that I still have a 1 and a 2? I had the black number 2, but I didn't have the number 1, and but I did find a number 1 and a number 2 in the white felt. I think this is the one from last year. It had gold stitching around the outside, and so I'm going to cut up another piece of vellum. Again, this is 4.5 by 6 inches, and this is going to sit on top as a fold over on my part 2, and that number 2 in the felt is going to sit on top, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. Again, using a 4x6 journaling card made that really easy to know where to fold it over, and because I did stitching on part 2, I'm going to need to cut off that, or cut out that little spot in the middle again. In terms of adhering my numbers on there, and you can see I'm also punching the holes, rounding the corners before I add it on top of there. I'm going to use red line tape to adhere the number onto the vellum. That's another part that could be stitched. You could use embroidery floss if you wanted to add a pop of color. I definitely considered that, but then in the end I just decided to go ahead and go with using red line tape to adhere them down, and you'll see that in a minute. So again, cutting out a flap there so that this could just tuck right inside. It's just adding a little bit of something, right? These are pages that are going to exist outside of the page protector. It would have been just fine to leave them as they were, but I wanted to kind of take it up one notch and add a little bit more embellishing, a little bit more creativity, a little bit more of just a process to this one. Adding a little bit more adhesive, because remember I had just kind of put a little bit of adhesive down previously before I ran it through the sewing machine. So the other thing that I wanted to do was stamp on these tabs. I'm using, it says This Life, and it is from the Pieces of Me stamp set that we offered probably the last time we did Pieces of Me, which was a couple years ago. The first time I did it, I stamped This Life with the bottom of the letters being the same place as the bottom of the tab. But when I folded those over and laid them on there, I didn't, let's see, a couple things. One is these tabs don't have color on the top. So they have color along the bottom edge, but not on the top portion. So what I decided to do instead was I stamped them the other way, which we'll see in just a second. It's like that is fine. That would have been just fine. But I decided that I wanted to do it a little bit different. So I re-stamped them, this time the opposite way, so that I could fold them over and place them underneath the number there, and have the This Life facing the other way. This is just kind of one of those little persnickety design kinds of things where, to me, it just feels correct, or more correct, if the This Life is facing into the page rather than facing out of the page. Again, this is one of those things that don't get caught up in this stuff. Don't make it, you can choose whatever you want to do, and whatever you do will probably be just fine. But I'm talking you through why I changed my mind on this particular one. So folding those over, and I actually it's kind of fun to see them as a tab going the other way, right? Without the rounded part. It's just a different way of looking at using them, especially when when the color doesn't go all the way across the top. It's just another way of approaching those. Red line tape now on the back of the number. This is like probably a 1/2 inch red line tape. That will definitely adhere it down on there. And then the only negative part about this is that you can see through to the back, and I'll talk about that in a minute, how I'm going to address that. I really liked on another project that I did recently, how I punched out some of the holes along the edges. I think that, it was on the one I did, the earlier love story project with the flip ups. So I decided to do that again on here. It's just kind of like a place to put your finger. And I like the look of it, right? It's adding another little design element on there. Adding adhesive, and then I'm going to add on the red line tape here as well. Let's see, what else can I tell you about this one? I'm just cutting up pieces of the red line tape to add it on there. Red line tape is a really good, strong, double-sided adhesive, and it's great for when you are working outside of the page protector like I am right here. This is going to get added on top of the vellum. Okay, I know what else I was talking about. So I did consider, with the vellum, I considered putting like another pattern underneath, or trying to think of, was there a way that I could cover up the back side of the number with something else? It's totally fine to leave it on there, because kind of who cares, you know, it doesn't matter, but sometimes I like to have things a little more finished, and putting something underneath that would cover up the underside makes it feel a little more finished. And actually what I end up doing is I jump into my stash and I grab some clear adhesive or clear word phrase stickers, and I'm going to use those and just put a few little phrases on the underneath side of the 1 and the 2. It essentially becomes a place to add a few more words so that it looks a little, you know, it looks like I thought about it, right? Like I thought about, oh, there's this blank space underneath here, and what could I do on top of it? That's right here where I'm pausing, is where I'm thinking about that. So I have a number of clear word phrase sticker sheets that are from previous project offerings. I keep all my word phrase stickers together because I like being able to just grab the whole entire bunch of them and look through them. That's often an embellishment that I add on to my projects. In this case, though, I just picked a couple that were related to my feelings and sentiments that made sense to me. One of them was like a note to self, everything's going to be okay. That's what I put on the first one. And then the second one is just going to be a combination of words. So as you are watching this video today, I would love to continue to invite you to be a translator of ideas, right? As you are seeing me tell specific stories that are specific to my life, are there stories in your life that you could use the same sort of template for, right? A part 1 and a part 2, where you can play around with having some big numbers on top of there. Maybe you have some felt numbers in your stash, or maybe you have a silhouette, or you want to cut some numbers, or a die cutting machine. That would also be fun. You could play around with pattern vellum. You could play around with transparency. Transparency is a little bit harder to fold, I think, but vellum definitely is something that's easy to fold. You could play around with the sizes too to make it a little bit different if there was something else that you wanted to add on to there. Lots of variations. You could also do 3x4 photo collages instead of doing a plain, or a 1 3x4 photo. And you can also handwrite your journaling. That's always an option. In my case, I just chose to type because it helped me think through a little bit more what I wanted to say. All right, guys, as always, let me know if you have questions in the comments below, and I'll be back very soon, as in tomorrow if you're watching this in real time, with another project using our love story kit as the jumping off point. Thanks so much. We'll see you guys back here tomorrow.